Okay, so over the weekend I watched Evil Dead Rise. And for context, I have seen the first Evil Dead, I've seen Evil Dead 2 and 3, and about a season and a half of Ash vs. Evil Dead. So I'm not new to the franchise, uh, but I definitely think that Evil Dead Rise, the best way I can describe it, is as a modern retelling, sort of the Evil Dead movies. And not in the sense that it rehashes the plot, but it kind of takes those ideas and turns them into a more modern kind of identity, where you still have the gore, you still have the brutality, you still have the sheer sadism that's characteristic of Evil Dead as a franchise. You get a few shots of the camera kind of like whipping through forest and like in the opening scene, which I thought was clever because they kind of played off as like a drone, so it makes sense. So it's kind of an allusion to that early Evil Dead style while also making sense within the identity of the film. Um, and so I thought that was interesting. It still has that kind of like very intense brutality to it in a lot of scenes and a lot of the kills that I really enjoy in the Evil Dead movies. I think that's something it does very well. But it also kind of relies on some more modern horror tropes, which I don't think makes the movie worse. I think it just makes it different. Things like you have this scene at the beginning where you just have kind of rapidly like summing up all the characters, which I think is something more common to modern horror movies. Like this is an A24 production, and you can definitely tell where it's less and tonally it's very different than the original Evil Dead movies, where there's less of an emphasis on like Ash Williams as this like quippy action hero. This new one has a lot less one-liners. There's not as much of that like there's not as much of that kind of like unrealistic action hero gunplay with Ash, like just using a shotgun with one arm. That's not something the majority of people can do feasibly, but it works for the Evil Dead because the Evil Dead is campy. So, but this new one is a little bit more grounded in the sense that like that any Evil Dead property is grounded. I mean, it's a movie about demon zombies, but they only really use the shotgun once, and it's fun. It's a fun scene, but like the protagonist also visibly struggles using it, and like that makes sense. She hasn't used one before, at least the best we can tell. So it kind of makes sense for her to have that very like clumsy use. Same thing with the chainsaw. Very iconic to Evil Dead. The chainsaw is like I think more the only other series that I would say has a more iconic use of chainsaws is Texas Chainsaw Massacre, because it's Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But that even that characteristic chainsaw comes very late in the movie, like in the climax, and the first time it's used it's used by the demons. I don't think they're ever referred to as Deadites in Evil Dead Rise, but I'm gonna use the term anyway. But the kind of conglomerate Deadite uses it to try to kill the little girl, and that's kind of the first use of it. And I thought that was interesting because this is something that's like it's a very trademark aspect of Evil Dead, but they didn't really use it as much as they like theoretically could have, and I liked that because it kind of gives the film its own identity versus the other ones. There's also a lot of very interesting or at least that I thought were very interesting. I liked the both of the scenes using the elevator. I thought those were pretty good. There's a lot of vomit in the movie, a lot of gore, which is definitely part of the reason I enjoy Evil Dead, but also it did get to me a little bit, which is rare. There's a few scenes there, especially some of the vomit scenes, like the scene where the oldest daughter is vomiting maggots. That made me a little sick. Same with the scene where the mom bites out the one guy's eye and spits it in someone else's mouth. That was a little much for me, but more in the kind of just, oh, I kind of gagged it that way, rather than like, oh, this is too disturbing. But still, that is also a very Evil Dead style of that kind of over-the-top violence of people being coated in blood, and I think that, so I think it does that very well. It's a very strong entry in the series, I feel, and I think it kind of, but I still think it does its own thing enough that I really enjoy that, where it's almost completely unrelated to any of the other Evil Dead projects. Where, granted, I haven't seen the 2013 version, so maybe it plays more into that, I wouldn't know. But the fact that the Necronomicon, I forget what they call it in the movie, but they have the Necronomicon, but it's a different design, where it doesn't have the kind of like human face. Like, they still make a comment like, oh, it's bound in human skin, it's inked in human blood, whatever. But it doesn't have that human face on it. And it kind of goes away to kind of defining it as its own thing, where the other Evil Dead projects, again, exception of the remake, the 2013, I think it's 2013, which I haven't seen, but other than that, it's all Bruce Campbell and Ash. Whereas this new one doesn't feature Ash at all. There's not even, I don't think Hugh Campbell even is in the movie at all, which wouldn't surprise me. It's a very small cast, which, again, I liked. It kind of contributes to this very what's the word? Claustrophobic feeling, which I guess is the same of a lot of Evil Dead, at least the first two movies. I think Army of Darkness kind of opened up the cast, and then Ash versus had that kind of road trip-esque feel, so there was a lot of like different characters. But within this one, there's only the 5 in the main family, the other family on the floor, and then the older guy, and then the family of 3 in the beginning. But other than, I think those are the only characters that appear. So so I think it's a lot closer to the first movie in that sense of this kind of, or no, probably closer to the second, of having this very isolated group, and then these other kind of background characters who get killed off. And I really enjoyed that about it, because it means that they had all the time to focus on this little family unit. Which I also think works, because it has another thing that I really consider the trademark of Evil Dead is its sadism. And what I mean by that is, in a lot of other horror movies, the killing's a lot less personal, at least not less, like, explicitly purposeful. Like, Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees. Both of them don't really speak. Like, yeah, Myers is going after this one girl, but, I mean, it's really hard to tell what his motivations actually are, other than he's just evil. And, quick tangent, anyone who thinks that, I very strongly disagree with the interpretation that he is literally made of evil. That's a misinterpretation of the psychologist line, whereas I think what it's actually trying to get across is that he is, like, they describe him as the shape of evil, and I think it's more meant to be like, if evil had a physical shape, it would be Michael Myers, rather than him being actually made of evil, because that's stupid. I digress. But so Myers is a lot less. It doesn't feel as targeted. Same with Voorhees. Freddy Krueger or the Nightmare on Elm Street movies are a little more specific, but even then, it's revenge for something they never did in the first place, which I consider kind of separate. Scream is a little more targeted, but Scream also plays a lot into the mystery of the identity of the killer. So the movie is less about it feels less personal because you don't know who's behind the mask usually until the end of the film. Whereas with Evil Dead, you have this kind of tormenting aspect to it, of the Deadites like playing on, or like kind of preying on their specific victims and their fears and their insecurities, which I find makes it feel a lot more personal, where in all reality, the Deadites are just random demons from what I understand. They're not really, like, they really have no qualms about who does and doesn't die. I mean, hell, in Ash vs. Evil Dead, you see them just killing random people, they fuck with random people. Like, yeah, they're hunting down Ash, but, like, it's not like they'll ignore other people in the process. If there's people to kill and Ash isn't there, they'll just kill people. That's the point. That's why the Deadites getting out is such an issue, because, yeah, they're gonna hunt down an Ash because Ash can stop them, but they're just gonna kill everyone eventually. Whereas in Rise, you still get that very characteristic sadism to it, where you have the Deadites making comments about things like the aunt, like being a bad mother and like how she could never take care of anyone, or the one Deadite says like, I'm gonna eat, like she's gonna, or I think it's the mom is gonna eat her soul, or maybe it's the daughter, I don't remember. Says it's gonna eat her soul, and it's like, oh, two souls, and like reaches, like tries, like digs its hands into her stomach. And I think that kind of sadism is very on par for Evil Dead. Same thing with, like, you know, blaming the son for his role in it. The mom leveraging, or the mom Deadite leveraging, like, their broken family to get the daughter to open the door. Stuff like that is, it feels a lot more personal. It feels a lot more evil, which I think gives Evil Dead its own kind of flavor to it, and I think Evil Dead Rise has that in spades. The other thing I think it does very well is it does the gore very well. There's a lot of very good, very interesting shots. Or I say interesting, not really interesting from a, like, directing angle, but from a, like, the content of what's being shown I find interesting. Like, there's the one elevator scene where the mom's body is being, like, ripped apart and, like, twisted and broken by the elevator cables. And that was probably my favorite shot of just this, like, desperate escape, like, attempt at escape, being dashed and just with this horrific, brutal death. But I think, well, actually, no. My favorite scene is one I'm about to talk about, where the daughter, after she gets possessed, after she's done vomiting maggots, is just eating chunks of glass out of this wine glass. And it's this very, like, uncomfortable, very gruesome scene where she swallows, and you can see the shards of glass, like, coming out of her throat as she swallows. It's a great scene. I really enjoyed it. To me, that is probably the most quintessentially Evil Dead shot in the movie. And I will stand by that until someone makes a better point. But I think that really shows that Evil Dead Rise is still very much an Evil Dead movie. I mean, hell, Bruce Campbell and Wes Craven? I think it's Wes Craven. The director of the original movies. Were, like, producers. like they had a very, so I assume they had a strong hand in it, where I think that definitely shows. But also I think Rise is interesting in that it's a lot more contained than the others, where like yeah, you have the opening, the cold open that shows that one of the Deadites got out. It's out there, it's in the world. But in terms of the core of the movie, like they escape. They feed all of them to a wood chipper, and I love that scene. And it's I really liked that. But that's a lot. Compare that to, the others where, the whole point of Ash versus Evil Dead is that he never managed to contain it. He never managed to stop it. And so I'm wondering if this is going to turn into a reboot of the franchise as a whole, and we're going to get some kind of continuation of that. But Evil Dead Rise, as its own, works. And more than one person survives, which I know more people survive the other ones, but the point being that it kind of takes until Ash versus for the idea of, stopping the Necronomicon to really come up. Before that, he kind of just leaves it. Which I guess is still true of this one, but to me it felt more final. If they didn't continue it, I think it would still be its own standalone story. But even within the context of the broader franchise, I feel like it's still a strong entry. I enjoyed it more than Evil Dead 2, at the very least. I think it might be my favorite Evil Dead movie, but I wonder how much of that is just because it's the most recent one I've seen. And it sucks that we didn't get Bruce Campbell. Bruce Campbell and Ash is a great actor. Ash Williams is a wonderful character who I love, but I understand why they chose to do someone else, because by now Bruce Campbell is like 70, I think, and like he's kind of getting too old for it. But I think the actors they got for this one are all good. I don't think there was any of them that I didn't like. I really thought all of the characters and all the actors were very well done. Even the little sister was very, she was good. I think this was her first movie too. But she had a lot of good movements, like Stephanie. I thought was funny, and especially how it comes back and they use it to impale the sister when she turns. The older sister, she's good. I liked her. The brother I thought would be more annoying, because he's the one who kind of kicks off the whole reading from the Necronomicon, but I think they handle him well. Everyone does well. I was expecting their other neighbors to play into it a little bit more, but they all kind of die off, which works. It's a very good, brutal scene, and it kind of serves to trap them in that room, which I also think is a very good parallel to the cabin from the first movie, of this very closed-in, isolated space, but rather than, being in the middle of nowhere, it's right in the middle of the city, but they can't get help, they can't escape it. And I think it works, and I really like that about it. But the one thing that I will complain about is I think they put the title screen too early, where it's kind of incorporated into the cold open, which makes sense structurally, but it feels weird to have that be in the cold open with these characters that we've never met, and that's the first appearance of a Deadite, and that I'm not sure how I feel about. I think it works, but I'd rather the title card almost come at the end of the movie. The way it's paced, but overall, strong movie. If you like Evil Dead, give it a watch. If you like good gore, uh, go for it. It's a very brutal movie. If you're into that, I think you're gonna like this. I think there are some comedic elements, but I wouldn't really consider it a comedy as much as I would the other movies. So take that as you will. But that's really all I have to say on it for now, and I'll be back next week.